Hi everyone, and welcome to the final session of today's Congress. This is going to be our technology panel, where we'll be looking at discussing clean flavours. Just a quick reminder to everyone that's joining this final session, maybe it's your first session of the day, depending where you're joining us from. We feel free to ask any questions or any comments or share any thoughts on this topic via the live discussion box, which you can find at the bottom right hand of your screen. We have a great set of panelists for this session, and they are keen for it to be interactive and hear your thoughts and hear your burning questions around this topic. So that's enough for me, and I'm going to swiftly hand over to Nancy, who is moderating this final session. Thank you, Nancy.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you are. It's really a pleasure. We have a great panel of speakers on this topic, delivering clean flavors, colorants, preservatives, and antioxidants, which is a really important topic, a very timely topic, and one that really has a great diversity of perspectives. So I'm going to pass it over to the speakers to introduce themselves. Minerva, why don't you start?
Hello, everyone. I'm really excited about today's session. So I am Minerve Vicente, and I am R&D director at Kraft Heinz. So I am on the manufacturing side. And I look after taste elevation and the food service channel. And what I'd like today is when consumer meets technology. So this for me will be an exciting session, and really please join us, ask your questions, make it lively, and we'll have a great moment.
And I think Nancy's having some challenges, so I might queue up. It might make it a little bit easier. So again, thank you very much to the organizers for inviting me to the panel. I'm really excited. We have a pretty diverse group on the panel here today on a topic that's pretty close. I'm Adam Janczuk from IFF. I'm the VP of R&D, responsible for innovating new ingredient technologies for the Nourish division, which focuses mostly on the food and beverages. One of the things I'm hoping to get out today, as well as bringing together an understanding of where does a clean ingredient or clean technology have to play, and knowing that it's not going to be across all products and brands. So the segmentation and the elements that are the most important will depend on the consumer, the market, and the type of product that they're looking to seek this clarity on. And I think it'll be a great discussion today we're going to have on where we see among the panels and different parts of the supply chain of the flavoring, the color, the colors that are involved, the preservatives and the antioxidants, and how does that play into the space when it comes to people's decision on the products that they purchase and where and how they purchase them. So looking forward to this. Thank you.
Vitor?
Hi, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I would also like to thank the invitation. So my name is Vítor Santo. I'm the director of Cellular Agriculture at Good Meat, which is a subsidiary of Eat Just. So Cellular Agriculture is essentially a department of our R&D team that is dedicated to the production of cultivated meat. So for maybe a lot of you, this is still a relatively new thing, or maybe something you're not very familiar with. So I'm actually happy to discuss some of that today, as we also engage in some of these topics. And I think as we bring these new products to the market, these discussions around clean labels and different aspects of the flavor components can be really exciting, and on how we approach this to really be upfront and have a very transparent process and education also to the consumer. But on broad terms, just maybe as an introduction, so cultivated meat is essentially real meat made from animal cells, so through animal cell culture technology. So it's not like a plant-based analog, like there's a lot of great products out there. This is actually made from animal cells. So I'm happy to discuss it further and engage with all of you in this discussion.
Great, thanks. Scott?
Great, thanks, Nancy, and thanks to everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning. My name is Scott May. I'm Vice President of Innovation at Givaudan, but also the head of MISTA. And MISTA is a global innovation platform that was formed about 4 years ago. We're located in the Bay Area, right in the heart of San Francisco. But really, it's a global platform and a global ecosystem with the purpose to help transform the global food system to meet the needs of the future. And if we think about what that future is going to look like, while flavors and colors are important, we have to think about the whole system. And really what we need to be focused on is redesigning this entire food system from the ground up. And so when we think about that ground up redesign of the food system, for me, it comes down to one thing, and that's biology. Whether we're talking about regenerative farming, which guess what? That's all about biology. It's about the biology of the soil, creating an amazing ecosystem in the soil, which is biology, whether we're talking about precision fermentation, whether we're talking about cell culture that Vitor just mentioned. It comes down to understanding biology and how we leverage that. And with biology, we can create new incredible solutions, whether they're flavor solutions, whether they're color solutions, texture, you name it. There's opportunities here. So I'm really excited to be part of this discussion and looking forward to taking it to the next step. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much. So you can see that we have some experts with some really great experiences from very different perspectives, and we'll have great insights. So I want to remind everyone to, we really like this to be an interactive session and to address questions from the participants to the extent possible. We'll try to get everybody's questions answered. In the meantime, to kick off the discussion, what I'd like to start with is kind of having clarity from each of the panelists on their perspective of what the term clean actually means in their world. So I'll start again with the same order of presenters. Minerva, why don't you go ahead?
Yes, so for me, clean label is now becoming a word that is generalizing. So we hear it more and more. It's not yet regulated, but it becomes more prevalent in all areas of the food industry. For me, it's got two angles. It's got one angle, which is the consumer side, and it's got another angle, which is more on the education. So the consumer angle for me, it needs to be recognizable. Consumer needs to recognize what is on the label, and often what we see, what is recognizable to consumers is that, well, they have it generally in their kitchens and they're using it themselves to cook. But that leaves then a whole area which might not be seen as clean, and that's where, for me, the education comes into play, whereby companies have a role to play in terms of the education of the consumers to have a better understanding. And I'll make an analogy, which is when consumers are shopping and they want to buy, I don't know, a TV, or they're going to buy a car. Yes, the price of it is way more expensive as a one-stop buy, but they will look at all the details about, I don't know, the performance of it, how much it consumes per kilometer per hour. So they will know quite a bit. And the point is, on food, I don't believe that the consumer is so much involved in that understanding and finding out, because that one buy is less expensive. That said, over the year, they will probably buy way more food than those kind of TVs or cars that they're buying. And that's where I truly believe that us here have got a role to educate more and provide that understanding on the different ingredients and what is their role, what is their functionality, where do they come from, so that the whole population is actually more educated about food.
Great, thank you. Adam, what would you add to this?
Yeah, no, thank you. And echoing some of the points, it's a familiarity, right? You're comfortable, you recognize it, you understand why it's in there. It's why people went into the pantry and looked for sugar or flour or any of these other baking ingredients, eggs, because you know what it did. It bound, it created a product, it gave you the taste experience that you're trying to do. And I think the clean really is an early indication of understanding of where that I'm consuming, where does it come from? Do I believe that it's good for me or it serves a purpose besides just making me want to buy more of it? And then how did this come to me as well? Because I think the cleanness, and Scott had mentioned some of this earlier about the biotech of, is this being done ethically? And we're seeing the evolution, especially in the plant-based food segment, where you have the conversion and moving into something that's nutritional as an alternative to animal harvested, and not only from the environmental impact of it, but also the perception that something plant-based is going to be nutritionally better for me than the animal alternative. So this comes back to the clean aspect of what is this food really doing to me as I consume it? How has it come to the table? And then can I recognize it from a transparency standpoint that everything in there serves a functional purpose? So, what Minerve said earlier is that part of it is an education and building a familiarity that this is okay. And how does a consumer make that decision in the product they buy? Because not every product's going to have the same criteria of, do I need to know about it? Whether you go for something that's more of a hedonic, it's a pleasurable experience versus something that's a nutritional experience, you're going to make very different decisions when it comes to that point of purchase. So.
For sure. People buy foods for many different reasons. So the definition of clean is fluid. It's not an absolute. Yeah, very, very good, very interesting. Vitor.
Yeah, I think I agree with the opinions so far. I think the familiarity aspect is certainly one of them. I think simple labels, there's always a tendency to assume that because there's less ingredient, it might be cleaner. There's also maybe a perception that we have to educate consumers to change. But actually, my company, we are in an interesting position because we do have products that are plant-based analogs, like an egg replacement, for instance, and now we're making cultivated meat from cells. So actually, from an ingredient standpoint, the labels that we will generate for both could be quite different. But in terms of complexity of the processes, it does not necessarily mean that one is better than the other per se. So we always get this question a lot, right? Because also whatever is in the composition of the actual food product goes well beyond what is listed in the statement, in the ingredient statement, right? And I think sometimes that's also the misconception that we deal with.
Absolutely. Scott.
Yeah, and so just to build on what Vitor said, I think clean is also not only about clean in terms of a consumer. So what am I consuming, and what is the impact to my body? But also, I think now people are recognizing the need to think about and be more transparent about the impact on the planet. So there's an impact to the individual and an impact to the planet. And so, we're talking about flavors and colors, and Minerve has a great picture behind her with this great real fruit. And if you think about, for example, if we wanted to create strawberry flavors for the world, which people love, we can't use real strawberries to create strawberry flavors. There's simply not enough, right? We'd have to cut down every forest on the planet to plant enough strawberries in order to do it. So it is simply impossible to do that, to create solutions that consumers love. And so that's why we have natural flavors. And natural flavors are made of chemical compounds that mimic a real fruit. And I mentioned this before we even got online, is that consumers like, well, I don't want chemicals in my product. And then you say, well, actually, do you know a strawberry is made up of about 60 individual chemical compounds? And when you make a flavor, we mimic those compounds. They all are derived naturally. We put them together and we make a strawberry flavor. Now you can also derive those same chemicals synthetically and have a synthetic flavor. Then you get into the whole debate of, well, what's more sustainable for the planet? What if you do an extraction process that is natural, but not necessarily sustainable for the planet versus a synthetic approach? And then it comes down to transparency. So if you're transparent with those different processes and enable the consumer to understand how they are created, then you also give consumers more choice. And I think so. Then we come back to what everyone said, which is this education piece, having choices available for consumers. And so for me, that's how I'd like to shape it.
Yeah, interesting. So if you're just joining us, please put your questions in the chat. We'll be happy to get them answered. We're having a really important discussion about what is clean, and it's not an easy answer. It's not an easy, clear-cut definition, and it depends on where you're standing, what the definition is. But I think there's a lot of people out there in the audience that are faced with this requirement, nonetheless, of go forth and make us clean, make us products, make our label clean, right? We don't want to hear all of this fuzziness, right? So what are some suggestions that you have for people that are sort of in the trenches and trying to deal with this today? Minerva, do you want to make some comments?
Yeah, that's a very very good question. So what I'd say here is, yes, there is an education piece. Yes, there is that consumer understanding. I also believe that, there's a company responsibility, because although we educate, the consumers, companies need to have also a standpoint and have a ethical responsibility around the products and the different ingredients. And to Scott's point, in terms of, we just don't have enough strawberries in the world just to feed the world. This is extremely important, because accessibility of food is a major point that we need to take into account. How are we going to manage that in the future? And that's exactly where technology, comes into play. How do we use that technology to drive that accessibility of food, but also that affordability of the food to the consumers, besides then all the functionality that we want to bring, that great taste, that nutrition element, or to reduce the salt, the sugar, to reducing ingredients that we do not want to have, or that positive nutrition element. So yeah, it is a very complex environment, and that needs to be really thought through with, also technical evidence and deep understanding of the making of those new ingredients, to then have a strong standpoint from a company perspective on those matters.
So it sounds like most companies, to the extent that they're able to, should be really looking at these new technologies and supporting them, and really doing everything they can to encourage the entrepreneurs out there and the creative folks and the scientists out there that are working on this. So Vitor, as one of those folks, why don't you give us some insights into what it looks like from your perspective?
Yeah, sure. I think that it's working in the animal protein space through this new technology that is not that new, to be honest, but new for this application. One thing that I found very interesting is that when we look, for instance, at big meat producers, and when we look mostly at intensified animal farming, actually they don't see themselves so much as animal producers, and it's more like animal protein producers. So if there's a system out there that is more sustainable, that would allow them down the line to replace some of the practice for something that could be more efficient, or at least have an alternative that they could use in parallel to develop products that are as good, if not better, than the current ones they put out there, they would certainly be open to these technologies. And this is something that I have to say that maybe that was a little bit of, we had maybe a different sort of feedback in the beginning, and we feel a change in the paradigm. And I think that's something that as you bring the technology and you demonstrate that you can do it by true R&D, then these companies will follow suit. It's all about demonstration of capability and that you can really develop those products. One thing I would like to add as well to the discussion is that I think that the regulatory input can also be quite important in the, not so much on the education, but on the perception as well. For instance, on some of these new technologies, having them, this sort of validation, being validated through a true regulatory review process, and really emphasizing that in the communication to the consumers really brings a lot of confidence, I believe, to these products. And that's something that, at least on our end, we're trying to do as much as we can.
That's great. Yeah, I'm happy to hear that the paradigm is shifting. And one of the things, I was just looking at a sort of a mini documentary on this, your industry. And one of the things that just hit me like a ton of bricks was that it takes the whole issue of contamination with things like salmonella right out of the picture. And I think if that can get more socialized, people kind of, those are things they can weigh, right?
Yeah.
Do I want salmonella, or do I want, meat that came out of a large vat, which tastes just as good, maybe even better. I don't know.
Exactly. And that's also where I was going before with the idea that not everything that is actually in the product is listed in the label, right? A lot of that microbiological composition, right? We're not aware sometimes. Hopefully, obviously it fits the specs, obviously, but it can be quite different. And this is where definitely our technology can bring some changes into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right.
I think
Kraft, yeah, we have, we had talked briefly about different types of products serving different needs in diets. And I think your experience spans a wide range of types of products, from snack products to sort of indulgence products to meat and potatoes, sort of main meal kind of products. How do you see this playing out maybe differently across those sectors?
Sorry, Nancy, you were breaking up earlier. Who's the question directed to?
To you.
Oh, thank you. I wasn't sure. I see this dependence on what the consumer is looking to get out of those products. And I want to kind of touch a point a little bit on what Vítor was talking about. And we were saying earlier is, if you think of the evolution of preservatives, and you have the antimicrobials and the antioxidants, a lot of that was because, one, we wanted to be able to make it accessible and available on the shelf for a longer period of time for people. So it's a shelf stability. But a good portion of that was also because we centralized a lot of our supply chain, right? We were talking about those large meat producers or animal protein producers. it's a lot of long distribution channels. And I think what we've seen with COVID is that once that channel starts getting disrupted, now all of a sudden the availability of these things or these preservatives are and these other, let's call additives, are added in there. That affects in terms of the way a product is being available for somebody, how they taste it, what is their experience, what are they getting after, and what substitutions they're making. So I think the evolution here is going to continue to be where people are looking at, we started out with this farm to fork, right? Closer, local. And I think by having that biotech or even being able to show that production of these things can have a smaller impact closer to the source. And you mentioned earlier that the chances of contamination in a more controlled environment is even lower. You're actually able to offer something in a more cleaner way, in a sense, in terms of that there's no pathogens you got to worry about, and the consumer has a confidence that this thing wasn't charted across the globe to get to my grocery store and it somehow looks miraculously perfect strawberry, knowing that it was imported from someplace down in Latam, right? So I think from a broad category perspective, going back to the original question, it'll definitely influence what people purchase and why, and where they feel, again, the familiarity, the transparency of how did this product get to me? Obviously, cost is going to be a factor because there's going to be the trade-off. If you can centralize it and still make it cheaper, yeah, people are going to choose that based on an economic standpoint. But I think overall, there's a desire to say locally grown because it then means less preservative. I'm supporting even socially the local economy. So there's a bigger importance on the cleanness of how these products are being produced. And I see all the major brands, and Minerve isn't one of them, on where you have the opportunity to leverage what ingredient producers do and the biotech to deliver on that promise in a more localized way.
Yeah, that's a really good point about the supply chain, and people really do now value knowing where their food is coming from, for sure. And I think that's important. Scott, what are you seeing in this regard?
Yeah, just to build on a little bit what Adam was talking about, in addition to, I think, a pretty sharp shift in how we see our food being produced, more local, creating more nodes of production. But there's also a challenge as food companies that we have to date, and that is the rapid pace of change and the rapid pace of new technologies that we're seeing. In my 35 years in the food system, I have never seen this kind of accelerated opportunities from, cell cultured meat, cell cultured plants, precision fermentation, using fungus, using you name it. It's coming at us from a million different ways, and with amazing, really, technology that is going to be pretty game changing in terms of how we see the food system emerging. But the challenge with all that is, how do you integrate these solutions in a way that makes sense? And so the old model, where companies were built in silos and we kind of held on to everything, whether you were an ingredient company or a CPG company, and you had this one-to-one relationship, what we're trying to do is blow that up through MISTA and create this innovation platform where we have a number of companies coming together that allows us to integrate these new solutions in a much faster way and understand how they impact. Because if you have a new technology that can, for instance, bring in a new color or a new preservative, we have to understand how that works with all the other components. And by having a broad swath of the ecosystem on a single platform, we can do that very quickly. And so we can help companies bring these things to market much faster. We can help explore these technologies, and I think help to evolve the food system much faster. So that's what I'm really excited about and what I see happening today.
That's great. So let me remind the audience to post any questions that you have. But I also have a question for the audience. And so I hope that if you can give me one word in the chat of of a specific ingredient or type of ingredient that has been your biggest challenge with respect to the clean aspect. Put that into the chat, and I think that would be interesting for us to look at. At least I'm interested, and I think we can focus some of our comments around those. So as you're doing that, what I would like to, Scott, you mentioned the accelerated rate of change in the industry. And one of the unavoidable topics that has been accelerating research and change in a lot of industries is, of course, the COVID pandemic. And so, from today going forward, from a researcher's perspective, we see this, I'm in the smell field, as not going away anytime soon in terms of the impact of COVID, the impact of it on the long-term health of people's flavor perception, and it may change their flavor perception for a long time to come. Why don't you continue your comments, Scott, but in the context of how COVID has changed the picture from your perspective.
Yeah, Nancy, that's a very interesting one. I mean, clearly it's shaken up sort of the way we think about the food system and the distribution of our food system to a more nodal approach. How we address the specifics though of long COVID, I think is we have a long ways to go to truly understand that. To even understanding, are there methods out there to support people in the healing process? So if they lose their smell and the smell is changed, are there protocols out there to sort of rebuild those receptors? And I have no idea, but that would be a very interesting one. But we also see other challenges with long COVID from people talking about changes to their digestion system. And more. So I think we're just now seeing all of this, and I think it's too early to say that we have solutions specifically, but clearly it's an area I think that will get more and more attention as we come on the other side of this. I don't know if we'll ever be on the other side, but as we move through this in a different way. So I don't have anything other specific beyond that.
Anyone else have comments related to this from what they've seen, experienced?
On my end, I mean, what we have witnessed is certainly, even more maybe a focus on centralizing production, right? When we think about the supply chain issues, and again, not to make it all about meat, but when you think about the issues that happened during meat distribution and supply chain during the pandemic, and even the partnerships we have been establishing are really focusing on these smaller countries that don't have so much of the local production as it is right now, really trying to develop and implement these technologies that will allow them to become more independent. So that's certainly one of the main motivations. So they're not so dependent on importation of food products and be really affected by these sort of pandemics, because this one of them we're probably due another one, hopefully not too soon, but these are cyclic. So it's just something that we can certainly see that affects the business development around these processes. On the R&D itself, it's certainly affected, but I guess that was maybe a little bit besides the point here, but certainly affected a lot of our operations and the way that we could maybe move even faster our technology forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the supply chain impact is a big one for sure. And again, it's probably more pushing towards local and traceability and all of that. Interesting. So we did get a couple of suggestions with respect to their most challenging ingredients. One of them is methyl cellulose and the other one is carmine. I guess that's a color.
Yeah.
Anyone have thoughts about how those can be done sustainably or cleanly rather, or or you have experience with them? Anybody?
Nancy, if you don't mind jumping
Sure.
in. So considering that both of those ingredients are in our portfolio at IFF as well, so pretty good understanding of those ingredients. I think it comes down to also, you know, the prevalent use of these ingredients throughout the product, right? They're used as carmine as a natural source of red color, but where it comes from the insect on a cactus is where people have the question. There's also the allergen aspect of it. So how do you separate the allergenicity from that ingredient? And we know now, as we're seeing more and more of the population having besides just the regular nuts, you're seeing allergens to soy. There's discussions around pea and other sesame and other things that are adding to that list. There's a genuine concern about what is these ingredients, even in trace elements, doing, and how does my body react to them? From the methylcellulose standpoint, if I was to look at it, it's also fundamentally you're using that ingredient as an alternative to egg. And I think Vitor had mentioned earlier that one of the early phrase into, can we do the same binding, the same gelation, the holding the product together that egg does without having to harvest it from an animal? And methylcell was an early entry to that, a quite established one. But the way it's produced, right? It's not just cellulose from plants, because that's where it's coming from, but then the modification afterwards to give it that unique properties, where most consumers have the concern over that. So I think where I see, at least in the comments of the evolution of those two ingredients, can we get the functional benefit? Maybe look at cellulose in a different way. And this is where we strongly believe that biotech is going to be the pathway forward. Instead of doing chemical modifications, let Mother Nature do the change, bring it to a way that if you're fermenting a certain plant-based material, you're fermenting, you know, a byproduct from sunflower or any other type of legume or something that has high levels of starches, you can then get the same benefit without having to pull it out of a byproduct from the wood industry that's making paper and paper products. So.
Nancy, if I could just add to what Adam was talking about, some very specific opportunities there. So we have an early stage company within MISTA called Microma, and Microma is essentially tapping into the functional properties of mycelium. And essentially they are getting the mycelium to excrete a red color. It's a natural red color that would replace carmine. And the cool part about this is it doesn't come from a bug. And it is also very, very stable across a humongous range of pH. So now you have a solution that is it's coming from, you know, biology and really making a big impact, because it's so stable across a range of pHs, which is, you know, carmine has some it's great, but it also has some challenges in that regard. And then when we talk about methylcellulose, there's a couple really interesting companies, and again, there's choices. So from the plant side, there's a company called Plantable out of Southern California, and they're using lemna or duckweed. It's not a very nice name, but it's a plant that grows on the water, and you can extract a protein, and it has a great binding property similar to egg. And then, of course, there's a true precision fermentation company called Clara. Clara is making basically proteins from eggs that can be used in the same way. So I think what we're going to see in the future is really a whole plethora of solutions coming from a number of either plant-based or biotech or both to address some of these questions. So those are some specific examples.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So I think we have a few minutes, about 10 minutes, 5-10 minutes remaining. And I think this question from the audience is a really good one to wrap up with. From Anna Belasova: meat and dairy alternatives, especially cellular agriculture, are new to the consumers. They benefit from the flavors, colors, preservatives, which are sometimes new as well. How can food manufacturers support customers in their novel food journey and focus their attention on the joy of food, not on the hard to digest information? So who would like to start? have to do a good job with marketing and education.
Right. This is actually a very interesting question, and something that we think about frequently, right? Because coming in as a novel product, we want to make sure that we educate consumers properly on the science behind it. But at the same time, I think a lot of people, when they eat their food, they don't want to know sometimes too much about how it is produced and about all the components that go into it. It's really, finding that right balance. And so I think that at this stage, we're still really focused on that. But now that we are, for instance, launching products into the market, right, we're focusing more and more on the culinary experience and really providing and highlighting those properties and more the sensory experience, the organoleptic, and really resonating how similar these products are to what the consumers are used to when it comes to a nutritional standpoint and a flavor standpoint. So I guess it's an evolution. It's a dynamic process. We're also learning with it, but it's a great point, and it's something that we're probably going to make some mistakes along the way. But we also have some learnings already from some of the products that we have launched already.
That's great. Minerve, you had a comment?
Yeah, I think this is really spot on as a question, and not just, let's say, for meat or dairy alternative. I just think in general, when we're talking about novel food and those technology really stretches. So with those novel technology, will we be spot on, the cleanest of the cleanest? Maybe not, especially in those new food areas that are currently happening across the world and across all food segments. So there will be, let's say, a little bit of I'm not going to say a trade-off, that's not the right word, but those technology will push forward those new segments. And then I really like what you said, Vitor, about, let's try and put forward actually all those benefits that are out there. And then one suggestion, was from my side, the link to chefs and how chef can help a lot in translating those benefits into consumer language is very important, and they really can help building as well the story around how those new functionalities come to life.
Absolutely. Bring in the chefs. I saw a segment with chefs cooking with insect protein recently. Some of the people liked it. Some of the results, I think, we're still not quite there yet. But Scott, you had a comment.
Yeah, just to build on what Minerve and Vitor were both saying is to leverage the whole chef approach, because I think most consumers appreciate look at the popularity of chef shows and that kind of thing, right? So they have the ear of the consumer. So let's leverage them in the right way. And we see many startups really coming onto the scene doing that approach. And I mean, Impossible started that they launched the Impossible Burger in through chefs. But now we see other companies, taking that even to the next level. So we have another early stage company called Tyndall. They're bringing plant-based chicken. And they're launching all over the world. It's fairly amazing, but they're using chefs to do this. And they're in addition to using the chefs, they're going out into set up these pop-ups around the world. And so they did one in New York, and I think they gave away, I don't know, thousands of their plant-based chicken sliders. And to also introduce it to the consumer, to explain to the consumer how this is produced, the benefits of these types of products. And I think that's the kind of thing that we're going to see more and more of, is a different kind of engagement level, a different way of marketing with consumers.
Great. Thanks, Adam. Just a brief additional comment from you, and then we have one more question.
Yeah, no, just to build on and echo some of the sentiment that was brought all over there, I think it really comes down to inspiration, right? Everybody wants to be inspired. Where these cooking shows come in, the chefs, it's bringing that concept to the kitchen in the house, and especially now with COVID, a lot of people unlock that home cooking experience. And if we can bring those products into a more easy to use, at your hands, I can do anything with it in the kitchen I can with the more traditional version. I think that's the way to help elevate and bring the consumer back in touch with the food that they prepare, and then use those ingredients as a way into that.
Yeah, really show it being used in familiar settings. Absolutely. So we had another question from Kevin Barrett. Starches were mentioned. If better binding is desired, why not use designer enzymes to modify the dextrins accordingly? Would the industry view this approach as acceptable and clean?
Since I guess I mentioned that, I'll jump in there. I mean, I think that's one of the ways to look at it, right? And if designing can be either minimal modification or no modification, and just finding it through what we call wild type searches. But ultimately, I mean, if you look at methylcellulose on a molecular level, and we're talking about molecules, it's a polysaccharide, right? It's a bunch of sugars strung together, and what gives it its unique property is how those saccharides are strung together and bound, and whether you can digest it or not. So modification on the enzyme level is one pathway to go there. It's a matter of how you do there and get there, because currently methylcellulose is chemically treated to give it to its position, and if you're going through chemical route, most consumers are now going to say, well, that's not a clean way. That's not how Mother Nature made it. So absolutely, designer enzymes as well as other biopathways. And Scott mentioned earlier, can mycelium or other organisms do it from a different feedstock than necessarily going for plant-based?
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to see the food industry going broader and looking at all of these different natural, algae and fungus and all of the different sources of enzymes and other materials that we can work from. So this has been a really great discussion. I want to really thank all of the panelists and the participants. We had some great questions and some good insights along the way. Thank you everybody for participating, and enjoy the rest of the event.
Thank you, Nancy, and thank you to all the panelists that joined us to conclude today's discussion. I thought it was a great discussion to finish on, and thank you to the audience that are watching. I've got some great questions that are coming in. I can see the fans come in as well, which is great to hear. So that concludes today's content for today. We will be back online for tomorrow for day 2, starting at 12 p.m. GMT time, when there'll be more focused looking at the investor landscape across the European and North American landscapes, and also more on the growth strategies in terms of manufacturing, and also looking at business models. So lots of interesting content to have you join us again tomorrow as well. And also, as I said earlier at the right beginning of the day, feel free to kind of continue with those meetings. We do have that one-to-one partnering system on the platform, which you continue today, depending on your time zone, or later tomorrow, or early tomorrow. And also feel free to visit the showcase sections, and also the partner booth. So thank you all again. It's been great having you join us, and great having our esteemed panelists join us for this session. And I will see you all again tomorrow. Thank you.
It was great meeting everybody.
Right, thank you. All right.
Bye.
Bye.